Israel is the most powerful state in the Middle East. Its military forces may not match the likes of Egypt or Turkey in numbers, but the might of its training, equipment, technologies, and nuclear weapons make it unassailable. Before we dive in details, please subscribe to the channel and stay always one step ahead to know all global important events happening around you. Give a thumbs up and share the video with your family and friends. Let's move on with the video. Given its long-developed capabilities in public order control, such a position should also apply to its control of radical dissent within its own borders, as well as in the Palestinian-occupied territories. Gaza may not be occupied in the conventional sense, but it is a small territory with 2 million people living behind borders controlled by Israel. It lacks a port. Its sole airport was destroyed many years ago, and its Mediterranean coastline is patrolled by Israelis at all times. It is essentially an open prison. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has persistently claimed that his country is indeed safe, that it has nothing to fear from the Palestinians, and that the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, especially in East Jerusalem, can and should expand, not least as Israel has established good relations with key Gulf states. With all this and US President Joe Biden's continuing assertion that Israel has the right to defend itself, the country should feel safe and secure. But in practice, it doesn't. Instead, an apt summary is of a state that is impregnable in its insecurity. It is impregnable in the sense that it cannot be defeated, but insecure in that the underlying threats will not go away, as is evident in the current violent confrontations. The key element of recent weeks has been the repeated incursion of the Israeli police into Al-Aqsa Mosque. That will have a far deeper and more longer-lasting effect than is currently recognized in the West. The Israeli actions at Al-Aqsa were extensive and stretched over a month, starting on April 13th, the first day of Ramadan, when police reportedly entered the mosque's courtyard and cut the cables to loudspeakers in its 4 minarets. It has been suggested this was to prevent the call to prayer interfering with a speech due to be given by Israeli President Reuven Rivlin nearby. This contributed to increasing Palestinian anger and more demonstrations, especially at the Damascus Gate and the mosque itself. As tensions rose and Hamas threatened rockets in response, the violence escalated to the evening of Friday, May 7th, when, as the New York Times put it, police officers armed with tear gas, stun grenades and rubber-tipped bullets burst into the mosque compound shortly after 8 p.m., setting off hours of clashes with stone-throwing protesters in which hundreds were injured, medics said. 3 days later, the police repeated the operation as the violence escalated further. Later that day, the first of the Hamas rockets were fired from Gaza. Israel's problem in Gaza is that it cannot prevent the rockets being fired without a military ground force intervention. However, the last time it sent in troops during Operation Protective Edge in July 2014, they came up against determined paramilitaries who knew the urban areas intimately and had long trained in urban guerrilla warfare. Over the course of that 2014 conflict, the Israelis lost 68 troops, while several hundreds were left wounded, some maimed for life. Yet, when a ceasefire was eventually agreed, IDF sources accepted that Hamas still had 3,000 rockets available, an arsenal that will have increased massively in the past 7 years. IDF leaders may believe that they have since prepared their forces much more effectively for ground operations. However, that same belief after the 2008 Operation Cast Lead conflict didn't stop them failing 6 years later. Prior to the events of the past month, Netanyahu had worked hard to convince Israelis that the Palestinians had been defeated and Israeli Jews could feel secure. This narrative was supported by a 40-year shift to the right in Israel, propped up by the influx of close to 1 million migrants from Russia and Ukraine in the 1990s, who were understandably determined to be secure in their new country. It was also aided by the near-wholesale privatization of the kibbutz and moshav cooperatives across Israel that had often provided a more liberal outlook. Furthermore, the idea that the Palestinians had lost and had to get used to it was promoted vigorously by sectors of the Israeli lobby in the US, most notably the Middle East Forum. And the many millions of Christian Zionists in the US are an ever-present influence on aspiring politicians, both Republican and Democrat. Whatever happens now, 3 elements must be factored in. One is that Netanyahu is fighting for his political life, and he therefore presents himself as the only politician who can protect Israel. What is happening is very useful for him, even if some of his coalition partners are angered and even afraid of the consequences, not least the serious civil disturbances within Israel and the growing political power of Arab Israelis. The second is that the mosque incursions are already having an impact across the Islamic world, from Indonesia to Morocco and beyond, increasing public support for the Palestinians, even if autocratic rulers across the Middle East prefer to deal directly with Israel and ignore the Palestinian predicament. The final element is something you won't often see discussed, but is my reading of the situation as it stands now. The Israeli government is reluctant to undertake any direct occupation of Gaza, however short-term. It will therefore use its current military actions as an essential opportunity to learn how to maximize the impact of strike aircraft, armed drones and artillery, but not ground troops, putting into practice what it learnt from its failures in 2014. The blunt reality is that weapons designers, strategists and corporations throughout the world will also be watching and learning. In my view, this is all part of the global transition to remote warfare, and from that perspective, Gaza, with all its deaths and injuries, is little more than a useful experiment. But the ground offensive is not the only strategy in play. The Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, have also implemented a series of devastating airstrikes targeting nearly 2,700 sites in Gaza. These strikes serve a dual purpose. They act as a strong deterrent, sending a clear message to Hamas, and they aim to weaken the enemy by destroying their bases and disrupting their operations. However, every strategy comes with its own set of challenges and risks. The airstrikes, while effective militarily, run the risk of escalating the already severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The destruction caused by these strikes can lead to a loss of essential infrastructure, making life even more difficult for the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The planned ground offensive also faces significant hurdles. Hamas operates within an urban environment with a complex network of bases and tunnels. This urban warfare makes the task of the Israeli military exponentially more challenging. Furthermore, the hundreds of hostages seized by Hamas could potentially be used as human shields, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. And then there's the question of sustainability. A prolonged war could stretch the resources of the Israeli military and strain their forces. Not to mention the potential for increased international scrutiny and pressure as the conflict drags on. As the Israeli military strategizes and maneuvers, they must consider not just the immediate impact of their actions, but also the long-term implications. They are not just fighting a physical war, but also a war of perceptions and ideologies. In this high-stakes game of chess, every move can have far-reaching consequences. But what does victory look like in a conflict like this, and is it even achievable? As we delve into our final scene, we navigate the murky waters of potential outcomes and the uncertainties that lie ahead. The objective of completely obliterating Hamas presents a formidable challenge. Operating within a convoluted urban environment, Hamas has built an intricate network of bases and tunnels, making a ground assault an arduous task for the Israeli Defense Forces. Additionally, the grim reality of hundreds of hostages seized by Hamas could potentially be used as human shields, further complicating the situation. Moreover, the concept of victory may not be as straightforward as it seems. Historically, Israel has sought to contain Hamas, fearing that the destruction of the group might leave a power vacuum that could be filled by even more extreme factions. The very thought of this possibility adds another layer of complexity to the conflict. Then there's the issue of sustainability. A full-blown military occupation of Gaza would involve a significant operation that could extend over a prolonged period. The endurance of such a protracted war is a concern in itself. Not to mention the fact that Israel would be confronting not just Hamas, but other militant groups based in Gaza. The prospect of defeating Hamas also raises questions about what this defeat would entail. Would it be possible to completely eradicate an ideology? The specific outcome of Hamas's defeat remains an enigma, leaving us to ponder whether Hamas is a permanent fixture in Palestinian politics or not. In the grand scheme of things, the definition of victory becomes increasingly nebulous. The complexities of the conflict and the numerous variables at play make it challenging to predict a clear-cut outcome. The future is uncertain, and the path to victory, if there is one, is shrouded in ambiguity. In the fog of war, the path to victory is often uncertain and fraught with unforeseen challenges. The challenges faced by the Israeli military in Gaza are not just physical, but also psychological, societal, and diplomatic. From the unseen challenge of navigating a complex urban environment filled with tunnels and bases, to the home front where the threat is not only physical but also a test of societal unity and trust in leadership. The battle plan, while meticulously crafted, is up against an adversary that is as cunning as it is ruthless, using hostages as human shields and exploiting divisions within Israeli society. The uncertain future looms large, with the fear of a power vacuum and the rise of a more extreme group following a potential defeat of Hamas. Furthermore, the sustainability of a prolonged war and the ability to maintain control over Gaza post-conflict are significant concerns. In conclusion, the Israeli military's struggle in Gaza is a multifaceted one, encompassing physical, psychological, societal, and diplomatic fronts. The complexity of these challenges underscores the difficulty of achieving a comprehensive and lasting victory over Hamas. In the end, the greatest challenge may not be winning the war, but securing the peace